I'm very happy to be here. Well, ideally, I could see you all and be there with you, but we all know that that's not possible. So let's make the best out of what we have. I have to say, they were very good in making a small picture of an audience, so I can just pretend I'm talking to someone. I'm Clementina, and I'm here today to share my thoughts about artificial intelligence, ethics, and user experience with you. The title or the metaphor of my talk is actually the Modern Frankenstein. And it all came about in 2018 when Frankenstein, the novel of Frankenstein, was 200 years old. And stumbling upon again on the novel, I realized how relevant it was and how still modern it was. This idea of a man wanting to build something, wanting to build a machine, and being at the same time afraid of the intelligence of the machine and what the machine could do against him. And this reminded me a lot of other narratives. If we look, for example, at Prometheus, the myth of Prometheus is a myth that is based on this idea that the fire is the technology that Prometheus steals from the gods. And we should be aware of stealing technology or dealing with technology because it's something that belongs only to the gods and that we shouldn't mess with. And that's why Patel says that Frankenstein is actually the dramatization of technophobia, like many other myths and stories that we know in the past. Again, if we look at the word robot, it was used for the first time in a Czech play, Rostum Universal Robots, and the word robot itself in Czech means slavery. And it was a story of this army of slaves who was meant to serve humanity, but then, of course, they become too intelligent and they revolt and everybody dies. And this narrative of rebellion, you can see it over and over again also in movies like 2001: Space Odyssey. And the question I have today for you is, like, is it really rebellion what we should worry about when we talk about technology and artificial intelligence and all the things that we build that are supposed to be smarter than us? And to answer these questions, I asked a bit the help of people that are experienced in ethics and in technology. But first, I want to do a step back and look also at the world we live in. Alan Turing was actually a mathematician that helps decoding the secret messages of the Germans during the Second World War. And is mostly famous for that, but he was actually the founder or one of the main ideator of what we call now the computer. And already back then, he just said, we are not disconnected agents, but we are informational organisms sharing with biological and engineered agents an informational environment. What does this mean? This means that when we talk about information and when we talk about technology, we are not above and they are just our underlings. It's like a network of information that connects everything and everybody. And this is even true and more true nowadays, where terms are actually the study and understanding of how humans and technology are merging together and what is the impact of this phenomenon. So we see it every day. We see this constant merging of technology in our life to the point that our choices, what we watch, where we go, the music we listen to, the partner we have, are basically defined by an algorithm. And you might question, yeah, but this is all, commercial products that are meant to just create more engagement and customers. And at the end of the day, I'm just like, I can decide when I switch it off and when I don't want to be a customer anymore. But what we see is also like algorithms are more and more used also in other domains. The police is trying to use algorithms to predict criminal behavior. This is an article from VRT News. The city of Antwerp is also using algorithms to detect drug criminality and fraud. And there was a case in the Netherlands where a Dutch court stopped a program that was meant to identify people that were more likely to commit benefits fraud because they claimed that the algorithm was discriminating migrants. So the question I'm asking you again is like, is it really rebellion that we should worry about? Or is there something else that we should be concerned when we talk about algorithms invading our life? And as I said, I relied on scientists of ethics to structure a bit my answers to this. And according to Floridi and Taddeo, there are three main pillars in data ethics. The first pillar is all the ethics around data, so everything that entails privacy and transparency, and GDPR gives already a very good answer to that. There is a second pillar, which is the algorithm, and there the questions are like, who is accountable for the algorithm, and what is the ethic of the design of the algorithm? And the third is the domain practice. So we all know, for example, that in medicine, we have already a deontological code. In another domains, we have rules for consensus of data usage. So because the first and the last pillar, the data and the domain practice, are the more explored, I decided to delve a bit deeper into the algorithm part. And there, another theorist, which is Brent Mittelstadt, he asks us to ask two questions, mainly when we talk about algorithm ethics. The first question he asks is, what is the logic or the evidence that is used by this algorithm? And to make you understand the different type of logics and what questions can trigger, I brought different examples. The first example is a robot who is meant to patrol parking lots or universities, and based on the way you look and based on the detection of your body and your movement, it decides whether you are a threat or not, and it calls the police. This is a case in which we can say that the evidence, the logic is inscrutable, because we don't know based on what parameters this computer decides whether you are a threat or not. The second example that I want to bring is this example where in the US, several teachers were fired because an algorithm decided that their performance was below average. When digging deeper into the logic of the algorithm, they saw that one of the main criteria to determine whether a teacher was performative or not was the fact that they were mainly taking into account the grades and the performance of the students. But we all know that the performance of the student might be influenced by other factors like the family context or any other social context that is around the student itself. So in this case, the algorithm was using an inconclusive evidence to come up with its results. But the most shocking thing of this example is that the teachers didn't question what the algorithm was saying, because they thought that an algorithm might be right, because an algorithm is always right, because an algorithm is objective. And that is the part that personally I find worrying, the fact that we trust so much the outcome of this algorithm as being objective. The third example that I want to bring is a software that is used in the US to determine whether to determine whether someone that has been just arrested or caught by the police is more likely to commit another crime, a similar crime. The software is called Compass. And in this case, these two people were arrested for the same crime. They were having with them some drugs, some marijuana. Both of them are the same age, both of them more or less the same social class. But the person on the left was actually considered more likely to commit the same crime than the person on the right. Now, again, if we go and dig at how the algorithm makes this decision, what the algorithm does is going through a bunch of historical data where by default Black people were more arrested, and therefore because they were discriminated. So Black people would be just arrested for nonsensical reasons just because of discrimination. Now, the algorithm doesn't know that. So what he detects is just that in the past, a person that is Black was arrested more. So he thinks, okay, well, it might be that he's more likely to commit a crime. So in this case, we talk about misguided evidence because the evidence that the algorithm is using as a base for its decision is actually biased in the first place. We answered the question, or we looked at the main question of Mittelstadt about the evidence, and he also asks another question related to algorithm that is essential in terms of ethics. What is the outcome? So we now saw, like, okay, how the algorithm reasons, but we also want to understand, to detect or to understand the ethics around it, what is the outcome that it brings. And in this, I want to bring two main examples. The first example is an unfair outcome. In this case, Amazon had put in place an algorithm to recruit new technicians, new technological developers. And in this case, it was seen that actually the recruiting was actually biased towards women, because only men would be actually recruited for the job. Why do we talk about unfair outcome? Because all the women basically were automatically discriminated, and they couldn't get the job just because the algorithm decided to. The second type of outcome is a bit more tricky, and it's what, again, scientists call transformative effect. Now, it's not the case anymore, luckily, but up to a couple of years ago, if you would Google CEO, this is the image result that you would get. And as you can see, it's very, very difficult to spot a woman in there. Well, there is a woman, but it's CEO Barbie. Not very representative, I would say. Why this is dangerous? Because if you are a woman and you Google CEO, you might think by this image that actually there is no place for you, or it shapes the common understanding of who a CEO is. And this is something that is much more deeper and cultural than what we saw before as not getting a job. So if we look again at these two types of outcomes, the unfair outcomes and the transformative effect, we see that in one case you have a harm of allocation. So there is someone that doesn't get a job, or there is someone that doesn't get a loan or an insurance. If we talk about transformative effect, we are talking about harms of representation, meaning a whole bunch, or a community, a group of people is involved, not only one individual, and it's something that is more long-term than not getting something, because it's not transactional, it's cultural, and it's much more difficult to identify. And let's be honest, as humans, we've always been very bad with other humans, and we've always discriminated. But the scary part of having the algorithms discriminate is that the scale at which they can do that is massive. So yeah, in the past, we've been using phrenology to decide whether someone was intelligent or not by looking at the shape of his face. Fine, we were doing that. But if we look now at algorithms, this is a very risky type of stereotype. This MIT algorithm is actually claiming that it can detect whether you are gay or not by the shape of your face. Now, you can imagine that the concept of this algorithm being used, for example, in countries where being gay is illegal. Again, a step in the past, 1950 probably, Kodak developed Shirley card. Kodak is the camera and film company. They started helping the labs that were developing the pictures in the calibration of the color. And to do that, they invented the Shirley card. Shirley was because it was the first model that they used for this card was called Shirley. And as you can see, there were many Shirley cards, and all of them have a white model. And they didn't realize that this was just not representative enough. And I always I find it very funny, the fact that they put the label normal, saying that whatever is not like that is basically not normal. What is interesting to see is that at a certain point they started having complaints, and they realized that this calibration was not good for not white skins, but they realized that only because producers of chocolate or wood started complaining because their product wouldn't come well in pictures. Step forward to today. Harms of recognition. Joy Bulow-Amini is an MIT student who tested different image recognition software, and in some of them she was recognized only when wearing a white mask. Now you can understand the impact of this. First of all, because you feel, well, I don't exist for this software, or I'm not normal, again, looking back at Shirley cards. But the impact that it has, if, for example, facial recognition is the software that is used to access certain services, you are automatically excluding a part of the population because of not being able to cater for them in this technology. Another example from the 19th century, Pearl's soap had a very funny, if we can call it like that, advertisement about soap being able to wash black skin. And again, this is not new. We've been always very good as humankind to discriminate other people, but the scale at which algorithms can do that is, I think, even more dangerous. Google Photos had an algorithm some time ago that was able to categorize automatically your albums. So it would recognize from the picture if you were in Cuba or if you were in a landscape, and just assign an automatic label to your pictures. Now, as you can see from this photo, these two people were categorized as gorilla. And then Google apologized and said, sorry, it's a beta version. We didn't really test it enough. And yeah, for me, that's not an answer, because if you test something, you should be able to test it with all possible people to avoid that these kind of outcomes happen. Now, I'm not here to depress you and to make you feel bad about what we do. I'm here to make you aware of what's happening, and I'm here also to understand together with you, how can we change this? How can we build a fair Frankenstein? And to me, there are a couple of myths that we need to demystify and look really at what are the facts. So the first thing that we need to look at is that the idea that data is neutral is not true. Data is never neutral. This is an example of one of the first database for image recognition. It's called Labeled Faces in the Wild. It was actually a scraping of Yahoo News, which meant that most of the people represented in that data set, I think about 80 or 90% were white, about 70% were men, and the most represented faces was George W. Bush. This means that the software that used that data set was much better at recognizing men than women, was much better at recognizing white people than black people, and was extremely good at recognizing Bush. So what I mean by that is, like, you need to understand what is the life cycle of your data set and really understand whether your data set is biased in the first place. Categories always help us to feel reassured, to understand the world, but we also need to understand, and I know I'm also as a UX designer and information architect, actually, can we challenge categories when we have a very simple form and we ask gender? Why do we need gender or race? And start questioning the categories we use to define products and to give access to services. The other myth that we need to demystify is the fact that code is a black box and we don't understand it, and it's like this magic thing that happens in the background. Well, that's not true. code is made by people, and code can be transparent. So when you code something, when you code a product, when you are dealing with an algorithm, strive for transparency. And there are a lot of guidelines. The one that I selected here is the one from gov.uk, but there are many, many ways in which you can make your code transparent and therefore accountable. We also need to demystify the fact that outcomes of an algorithm are objective. As I said before, sometimes we think, yeah, I mean, it's an algorithm, it's a machine, so it's not biased. That's not entirely true. And how do we avoid that? We audit. So like Joy Bulamini did with the image recognition software, we can test algorithms to see if they are discriminatory towards a minority or towards a category of people. And you can do that, for example, if it's a recruiting algorithm creating fake CVs and see the results of it. There are many ways to test what a machine outcome can be. The other myth that we need to demystify is that whatever you build is inclusive by default, that is not excluding or harming anyone. Well, that's not entirely true. We know that most of the time we refer to the context in which we live in as a base for the type of people we are catering for. And how do you avoid that? Well, one of my colleague designer tool called the Panda, which is very funny as well. And it's basically a sort of a checklist to understand whether there are people that you are either excluding or even harming in your product or in your service. And for example, you can see here that you can check people that you excluded voluntarily because they might benefit from the solution, but in the moment, so that you excluded because you wanted to exclude them because they are not your target group, but you can easily identify as well the people that might have been included, but it's just because of your being not neglectful, but just biased, because we are all biased, you didn't consider them in your solution. This quote is a quote from Thomas Wendt, which is also a theorist of design, and what he talks about is mainly also how the impact that we have with the product we design and we put out in the world. And what he says is that a sustainable future hinges on practitioners' ability to choose which futures are preferable. What we introduce into the world will always have social, cultural, and ethical consequences. And it's true that sometimes I have these answers from a lot of people from, if I give this talk to a bunch of developers, for example, they would say, yeah, but you know, I'm only an engineer, I'm only a developer, and I don't know what I can do, and I feel it's just like, you know, it's above me. And then I always bring back the story of René Carmil. René Carmil was actually an engineer. He was working for IBM, and he was working for the machine that was punching the identity card of Jewish people to detect who was Jewish and to therefore go for concentration camps. And he hacked the machine so that he saved millions of people because their card was not punched and they could be not recognized as Jewish. And he was only an engineer as well. This is the end of my talk. We will go into questions, and you will have some time to write your questions into the app. I don't know if we will have too many questions to answer, so therefore I will ask you to sign my Twitter handle so that you can still write to me afterwards if I didn't answer your question afterwards. For your questions. So one of the first questions was about whether the slides will be shared. Yes, the slides will be shared, and you will also get the recording of the talk. The slide will be shared on the playbook. There was a question about best practices on ethical committees. I have to say that the word committee makes me cringe already a little bit, because a lot of big companies like Google and Amazon, they are now setting up indeed this committee to make sure is considered working, but most of the time is again a bunch of white guys deciding on other people's future. So what I would recommend as a designer and as a practitioner is to make sure that you have diversity in different areas. So on one hand, your team should be diverse. If you're always surrounded by people of the same social class or context as you, you will more likely to be biased. The second one is that your target users and your user research should be diverse. So the problems we saw with those algorithms was that they never really tested with people with different skin tone or people that come from a different minority. So the more you open up the boundaries of your target group and include more people, the better it would be on an ethical sense. And then there is a lot of work that you can do on yourself on being aware of your biases. So we are all biased because we are human. And here I even touch on the other question that I got, like, how do we avoid this? How do we, by, for example, using the panda or using other techniques, avoid to be biased or avoid that this happens? And I think part of the solution is also making yourself aware of the biases that you have, just because it's human. I'm not saying that you're bad people. I'm just saying that we are all influenced by our cultural background and the way and the context in which we live in. And because our mind works like that, we cannot compute all the different possibilities all the time. We're always prompted to think the easiest and fastest solution. That is what matches more our mental model. The more you are aware of what is your fastest solution, the fastest route that you take with your mind, the more you will be able to diverge and find other options as well. There was a question that I'm not able to answer right now, but I will try to answer later on, and then maybe they can share the answer with you, is if I have examples on how the government in Belgium uses artificial intelligence. Beside the example that I put in the slides, I currently don't have any other valid examples, but if I find more, I will share them with you. I don't know if there are more questions that you can read out loud or.
Is there a way we can make complex machine learning algorithms understandable? And why do we put a higher standard on machines than on humans to make themselves understood?
We can't make code understandable by non-coders, but we can make what I explained also in the slides, the logic transparent. So we can always show how an algorithm comes to a decision and what are the criteria and the parameters that are used into account. Why are we so hard with machines? Well, because again, what I mentioned in the talk is that the machine can be considered as more objective, but actually is not. So we should be extra careful that the outcome is extremely fair, and because of the scale at which this machine can be used. So the fact that they can be deployed and affect so many people makes them extremely dangerous if they are not fair enough. I'm checking if there are more questions.
Where should we take care of misuse of IA? At the data production point, where people have no clue for what it can be used. At the smart institution or company that interprets the data and sells it. Who know, but they know how it works, but they will not tell how it works.
Yeah, so indeed, it's a step that sometimes in the full process you most of the time don't have a full overview or a full control over the full chain of the production. In that sense, what I mentioned before as my own recommendation is still to question. So you are selecting, for example, a provider for a specific solution. Within your requirements and questions that are mainly most of the time technical and requirements related to your business goals, you still should be able to question the ethic behind the solution that they propose. So it should be even just a criteria for a selection of a provider, and whether you have not control over their chain, you do have control over choosing them or not, whether they are not proposing you a valid solution.